Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. On today's episode, I have a very fun and interesting conversation with Anne Burdick. Anne is a graphic designer, a writer, researcher, and educator, and is currently the chair of Art Center College of Design's Media Design program in Pasadena. In this conversation, Anne and I talk about her early interest in design, where she grew up with a father who was a designer and actually attended the Aspen Design Conference when she was a teenager, and then working as a designer and growing disenchanted with it before attending Cal Arts so she could study with Lorraine Wild. It turns out that Anne's career and trajectory mirrors a lot of my own journey, from wanting a deeper critical discourse around design to trying to build a career that's sort of a mix of self-initiated work and teaching and writing and client work. We also talk about how she started writing and got connected with Emigre. We talk about how design can't fall back on how it's always been done and has to evolve to react to and be a part of our contemporary culture. I was also really fascinated with the Media Design Practices MFA program that she runs, and we talk a lot about how they think about design there and the role of the designer and the new types of practices that are available to contemporary designers. I have nothing but the best memories of my own MFA experience, but I have to admit that talking to Anne about this program, I would have loved to experience what they're doing there. I think it's just so interesting. As I hope you'll hear, this was a very fun one for me. I really love talking to Anne and am just in awe of the work she's doing and was so glad to get to have her on the podcast. So this is me talking with Anne Burdick. I kind of wanted to start. I only recently came across your work. You're one of these people who I feel like I've encountered your work, your writing, your name, and kind of all of these different places, and I never put them all together until just a couple months ago, actually, where it was like, oh, that's that person. She's the one who's doing all of this stuff. And so I don't, I'm embarrassed to admit that I've kind of come to discover your work more holistically just in the last couple of months. So I kind of wanted to start with just a little bit of your background to help kind of put a frame around some of that for me, and then we can kind of talk about that work that you are doing. And sure. So I kind of wanted to start with just a little bit about your background and specifically where your interest in design came from, or how did that start?
So my father was a designer.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, he was an environmental designer or industrial designer. And he designed, he worked for the Ames when he was in his early part of his career. And then he designed furniture for Herman Miller, and he designed a lot of really interesting exhibitions. And so, I kind of grew up in a studio. Okay. So design was sort of always around me and like a part of my life from the get-go. Without going into too much detail, but I ended up kind of following in my father's footsteps and then having a period of rebellion. So following in my father's footsteps meant that I went to, for a portion of time, a part of my undergraduate education at Art Center, College of Design in Pasadena. And then rebelling against my father meant that about 7 years later, I went to graduate school at Cal Arts, where, he said, you're going to, what are you going to do there? Wear hoop earrings and make macrame? And so anyway, it's, so the really interesting thing that I learned from my father was, because he did exhibition design, that it kind of married three-dimensional industrial design with learning and interaction and
Okay.
content. And so the kinds of exhibitions he did were like Museum of Science and Industry, or
Mm.
he did an exhibition on creativity where he featured, John Cage
Oh,
and
wow.
Judy Chicago and Buckminster Fuller. And, he got to interview these people and I got to meet some of these people. And so I was always around this idea of design as a really interdisciplinary,
Right.
ideas-based way of engaging with the world. So my interest was in graphic design because I was really interested in writing and text and books and things like
Okay.
that. And so my degrees are all in graphic design. But when I went to CalArts, it was similar to your story of going to MICA. I was sitting in a really awesome design studio with a lot of very enlightened and really amazing colleagues or co-workers, but no one was really asking questions
Right.
about work around me, and there was an AIGA meeting in the studio one night that I was listening in on as I was, making mechanicals at my desk. And Lorraine Wild was there.
Okay.
And the way she spoke about design, like, really kind of blew my mind. And I thought, oh, this is the kind of thing. And so I started looking at her work. And it's really because she was a writer and a
Right.
designer. And she was one of the few design critics, design historians who was writing critically at that time. This is before Ellen had published
Right.
her work. And and so I was like, I want to study with this person. So,
Okay.
and then also at that time, coincidentally, my boyfriend was roommates with Barry Deck, who was
Oh,
one of
wow.
the early students in the graduate program at CalArts. So,
Okay.
um, yeah, and so Barry was the first person I heard refer to a typeface as being racist. And I was like,
Mm.
wow, type design can be racist. And, just talking about meaning and culture and politics in the context of design was not very prevalent at the time. And so that's why I went to school at CalArts, was to get exposure to that kind of thinking. And also I was really just interested in writing and designing.
Right. I mean, we're not, we can't see each other right now, but I have a big smile on my face because you've kind of hit five other points that I kind of wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things in there that I would like to pull out a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
And the first one is, I'm always interested. You're the one of the big reasons why I wanted to talk to you is that it seems that very core to your work is this idea that design is more than just this kind of visual decoration, and that comes across in kind of everything that you do, whether it's kind of writing, design work, or even the program that you run now seems like that. And I'm always curious, and I think that I'm that way, and I'm always curious where that comes from. Like, why there are certain designers who are drawn to that side of it, and then there are other designers who are drawn to the visual side of it. And that's not to say that, the two of us are not visual people or not drawn to that, but there's that other side. And so it sounds like that's just always been there for you from a very early age. You were kind of exposed to that.
Yeah, I was definitely exposed to that. And, I just got bored at a certain point.
Right. Yep.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like there's got to be more. I mean, I know that there's more to this, and actually, just sort of frustrated with. It's funny when I left Art Center. This be 80s. I went to interview with the head of the program and to say, I'm I hadn't completed my degree, but I was just leaving to go
Okay.
work, and I said, what would be really interesting would be to have a class in design thinking, not knowing what design thinking became or become had beca-
Right.
has become.
Was that term
No,
like
no, no, that did not
had
exist.
IDEO made that yet?
No, 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 no,
Okay.
no, 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 no.
That's amazing.
No, and I'm not saying oh, I invented design thinking,
Right.
but I just remember having this conversation with him of saying, this way of thinking that is design, like
Hmm.
communication and meaning making and which was sort of the emphasis for me at that time. I wasn't getting that in my classes, and I thought that they needed something dedicated to that. And so,
Interesting.
it was just kind of, yeah, I don't know.
That's kind of related to the other question that I have around your background is hearing Lorraine Wild, and she's somebody whose writing has been very influential to me, whose name comes up all the time in these conversations that I have. When you heard her, could you tell kind of immediately that she was talking about these things the way that you were kind of wanting more of, or talking about things that you felt were missing in your design practice?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was instantaneous. I mean, there wasn't, yeah, I don't even remember what she said.
Yeah.
I just remember thinking that is the thing that I am looking for
Right.
and not finding around me. And so, yeah, it was
And
just kind of, that moment of recognition.
yeah, and I mean, and I feel like Cal Arts, especially in the kind of early mid '90s, really
Yeah.
became the hotbed for thinking about design critically, thinking about design theory. There, I feel like there people from Cal Arts are very connected to Emigre, which was obviously very big. Were you aware of all of that at the time, also, or was that kind of why you wanted to go there, or was that all new to you when you started there?
I was definitely aware of Emigre.
Okay.
That was sort of in, any kind of culturally oriented experimental design studio, Emigre was
Right.
around.
Okay.
And I also was aware of Cranbrook,
Right.
and had met the McCoys and some of their graduate students. But again, that comes from being at the International Design Conference in Aspen
Right.
from the time I was 17 till the time I was 27. With my dad.
Right.
So going there is a kind of annual family excursion, and so meeting a whole batch of graduate students from Cranbrook who were there with
Right.
the McCoys, kind of thing. So but design, but the critical theory was not something I would have been. Let me take it back. I quoted Marshall McLuhan in my
Okay. Okay.
in my application essay. But it would have been at CalArts. I mean, CalArts was, in addition to what was happening in the graphic design program, it was just like a hotbed
Right.
of multiculturalism, feminism, Marxism, critical theory. I
Yeah.
definitely, because I was interested in writing, was taking lots of classes within their whatever critical studies department, and
Right.
um, so that's where I really got exposed to kind of rigorous theoretical
Okay.
thinking and writing.
I mean, that actually, this was not a question that I was planning on asking, but I have the reprint of the Blueprint for Counter-Education
Oh, right.
book
Yeah.
that is very related. I think some of the people were previous CalArts professors. I don't know exactly kind of how that connects to it exactly. But was there a lot of, I don't know the word, was the kind of critical theory department that was talking about all of those things, was that seeping in to the design departments also, or
Oh,
or did they
definitely.
seem
Yeah.
separate?
No, definitely. I mean, it was pervasive throughout the
Okay.
institution. So, with the sole exception of the character animation department, which was always really
Right.
sort of funny.
Right.
Um, but no, that was, I mean, the art, um, let's see. Um, There was, when I was a student there was an exhibition that I loved that was this kind of mining the institution kind of
Mm.
exhibition where one of the art students had gone into the archives of the college and had found all these materials. And so, historically, there was a time when the graphic design department was the women's design department
Oh, right.
and they kicked out all the men.
Right.
And so there were loads of documents from that time with, like writings from professors from whatever, instructors, um, that said things like, today we sat in a circle and we broke down the hierarchy between,
Yeah.
faculty and student. And, all this really early feminist activities that feel so naive now, but were this kind of really necessary step in terms of figuring out how to rework patriarchy, basically.
Right.
And so no, it was embedded in the college as a whole. And Lorraine was hired by Mary Lord. I mean, she
Mm.
was, a feminist
Hmm.
critic, and um, so it was the institution,
Right. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
I have
And it
two.
was the openness, actually, let me just say, sorry, it was the openness of the institution to alternative pedagogies
Right.
that um, I mean, I don't know, it would be better to get the official history from someone else, but,
Right.
basically, Catherine Lord, did I say Mary Lord? It's
Uh,
Catherine Lord.
okay. Okay.
Anyway, it's my understanding that Catherine Lord read something that Lorraine had written that was like a new model for design education and called her up and said, "Come do this here."
Okay.
And so it was, CalArts was allowed to flourish and be this kind of, as Stephen Heller called it at a moment in time, a hotbed for, whatever kind
Right.
of yeah, radical thinking.
Right. Right.
And but that was the institution.
Okay.
It was, yeah.
I have two other quick questions just kind of around your time there and around your background before we kind of move into your current work. And one of them is directly related to what you were just talking about. And I'm curious if you were seeing those kind of critical theory classes having an influence on the design work that you were making at the time, or how you were thinking about your design work.
That was really woven into the project briefs in the graduate program.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, I guess different people engage with it in different ways. I mean, for me, like the thing that ended up becoming, wait, let me just rephrase that. For me, the my thesis project was actually writing,
Okay.
that I then designed, and it was this piece that ended up in that Looking Closer collection, but it was
Right.
published in Emigre, and it was called Neomania Feeding the Monster,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so it was about the role of style in the style as a kind of cultural language.
Yes, I
And
remember
that
this
was
piece.
directly informed by reading, Stuart Ewan and all the cultural studies critiques of the
Okay.
time, looking at semiotics and structuralism and post-structuralism, Dick Hebdige, Subculture and the Meaning
Oh
of
yeah.
Style. Yeah, so, and Dick Hebdige, well, later, a little bit later, came to teach at CalArts. But that was all, those were readings. I mean, that would have been the trajectory I took. Not every one of my
Right.
classes,
Right. Yeah.
but
That's
that critique of meaning was embodied in the projects.
okay. And just to kind of tie all of that up a little bit, You mentioned earlier that you always had an interest in writing and text and books. Was that something that was did you see that very early on as related to your design work, or I'm kind of curious of when you started writing about design. Was that
It
in
would have been
school?
when I went to grad school.
Okay. And was that something that you were kind of conscious of that you wanted
And
to?
I think it was definitely the reason that I wanted to
Okay.
go to study with Lorraine Wild at CalArts.
Okay. Okay.
Absolutely. The being at the International Design Conference in Aspen and watching people, designers, speak on a stage to an audience about design in an intelligent way
Yeah.
was great exposure.
Yeah.
And I, for whatever reason, some like crazy combination of naivete and hubris, thought, I want to be that person
Right. Right. Yeah.
there. I want to be thinking these things. I want to be standing on that stage. I want to be sharing them with others. I want to be having a conversation about it.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I relate to that kind of whole story completely.
Yeah.
To
I know
to
when
be
you were
honest.
telling me your trajectory, I was just like, oh my God.
Yes, this yeah, I mean
Parallel lives.
we're
Yeah.
very similar here. And so I'm curious, I mean, so that's why I'm really curious when you were kind of graduating from CalArts, what were you thinking was next? Did you want to go back to being a practicing designer, or kind of how did these things start to fit together as a career for you?
Well, so I went to the Netherlands for a
Okay.
year. My time at CalArts coincided with uh, Rudy's engagement with Jeff Keedy.
Okay.
And, so Barry Deck and Lori Makala and Lorraine and Jeff and Ed were all sort
Right.
of, in dialogue with Rudy. And Rudy handed over an issue of Emigre to Jeff Keedy to edit about CalArts.
Right.
And so a piece of that was my first year at CalArts, and a piece of my writing was in there. And Rudy really liked it, and he asked me if I had more.
Okay.
And so that was my first piece of published writing, I think.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
and so that was encouraging. And also, Lorraine had written an essay, and in it she had quoted something I'd written. And I thought, oh, wow, Lorraine was
Yeah, yeah.
awesome. That's validation, right?
Yeah.
So, like, oh, okay. So I'm thinking something that's
Right.
no one's put out there before, maybe in a little bit. And so that was super encouraging.
I'm kind of curious. I'm very interested in people who kind of immerse themselves in design academia but never leave the kind of professional world also. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, and that it seems like you've maintained a professional design practice while also writing and teaching and running a design program. And I'm kind of I'm interested in how that was. That a conscious decision for you? Were you kind of looking for that type of career, or was that something that just kind of happened organically?
Yeah. So when I left CalArts, I definitely wanted to keep writing.
Okay.
And so I actively pursued an ongoing conversation with Rudy. I went and visited him before I moved to the Netherlands. And that was when he said, do you have any more writing? And I said, well, I have my thesis. And he's like, well, that would be great. I'd love to see it. And so I moved to the Netherlands. I was fortunate enough to land in the studio Barlock, where Vincent van Bar was working with Armand Mavis and Lyndon van Dersen on this next issue of Emigre. But that was all because Rudy connected me with them, which was amazing. And so I got to be there in the studio working on that with them and assisting and stuff. And then I kind of did a trade with them. Like, I taught them how to use their new Macintosh computer in exchange for getting time on the Macintosh in order to produce the piece for Rudy in publishable form. And then I had met Rick Pointer around that time, and so started writing for iMagazine. And there weren't design criticism was totally nascent, and a lot of it is just being in the right place at the right time. And here's editors who have pages to fill. and they're just looking for voices, right? And there just weren't that many. And so I think I was really fortunate to, I had a lot of opportunities because it was kind of a wide open field. So then, I had all these new models of practice in front of me. I had, what Jeff Keaty and Lorraine Wild and Ed Fella were doing. I had what Burdick was doing. I had what these Dutch designers were doing. And, that's what I wanted, was this mix of criticism and practice.
Yeah.
And then, and some teaching too, because I really liked teaching. I'd been teaching for a couple of years before I went to grad school.
Oh, okay.
And that's the first sense of like the meta of thinking about what design is, right? Is through teaching.
Yeah.
And so, so I really liked the shifting of points of view, being in design, being outside of design, and being meta about design, right? And so, and then my idea was to do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which ends up being like 1/3 self-initiated projects, 1/3 teaching, and 1/3 studio practice.
Yeah.
But of course, it ends up being like 50%, 50%, 50%.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, this sounds, I know what you're talking about right now.
So then there were times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to teach full time all the time. And I went and taught for 2 years at North Carolina State University, which was awesome because that was when Andrew Blauvelt was there. So that was fantastic.
Oh, wow.
And, became good friends with Andrew, and also, exposed to the rigor of his thinking and the graduate program that he was running there at that time. And that's actually when I edited those 2 volumes called Mouthpiece of Emigre magazine, based on writing and design. So that allowed me to like get some funding and to dedicate some time specifically to that. But then I missed being in like professional practice. And so, kind of shifting back and forth with different proportions of each. But, really the last like 5, 7 years, I haven't had a client for maybe 5 years now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so now I'm really shifting into research mode.
Right. All right. And I want this is perfect. I want to it is really amazing to me kind of how similar your trajectory is to the career that I feel like I am on, in that I am now in that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, where I am teaching at schools here in New York. I am kind of running a small studio that, me basically. And then I'm doing this podcast and writing and kind of, these self-generated projects. And so everything you're talking about, I relate to. 100%. I really want to talk to you. Something that I'm very interested in is this program that you're running at Art Center, design
media design practices, we call it. Yes.
And I would love for you to kind of, before we kind of talk about it a little bit, just, even if it's just kind of like the boilerplate, but just what is that, and what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, it means that we're confused, which is exactly what we want to be.
Right. I love that.
It means that we're at the edge we're like perpetually keeping ourselves at the edge of something that's emerging and has yet to take a full finished form. And that's exactly where we like to be, which makes it a very difficult thing to define and describe to people. But it's, it's a kind of interdisciplinary, emerging, it's designed for the world as it's rapidly changing and emerging. And I think that there's new roles for design, new places for design to show up, and new challenges for designers to address within design itself. So, it's just a place of like constant questioning, constant invention, loads of meta things, and then lots of really like granular hands-on
Right.
kinds of things.
I mean,
So
without getting too kind of specific and technical, I'm curious, like, what is the, I don't want to say what's the curriculum, but what's happening in the classes.
okay,
You know what I
so
mean? Like, that sounds
yeah,
so
yeah.
weird to ask it that way, but
Well, so let me just say our core faculty has very little overlap in terms of disciplinary expertise. And so there's 5 core faculty members and myself, and sort of by design, we all have different kind of disciplinary roots, but we're also all hybrid people who are bringing multiple disciplines into the mix. And so a lot of co-teaching so that you always have multiple perspectives.
oh, interesting.
Um, Belief in design as a mode of inquiry.
Right.
So meaning, designing to get someplace you haven't been before. Designing as a way of investigating the world. As well as designing as a way of sort of generating new forms and ideas and systems and things that you put out into the world. So yeah.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I had a incredible graduate school experience, and I wouldn't trade it, and it was everything I wanted it to be. But I'm so mad that I didn't know about this program when I was looking at grad schools.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah. So what we've been doing for the last 7 years is we have 2 tracks, and one is called lab and one is called field.
Okay.
And so the lab track this is the boilerplate stuff, right? Deals with emerging ideas from science, technology, and culture. And the primary context for doing work is the kind of lab/studio. So it's driven by the designer's curiosity and as in dialogue with new technologies, experts from different fields, stuff happening in biotechnology or I don't know, new social formations.
That's so interesting. I mean, I was looking at your faculty list and advisors, and when I saw, people like Benjamin Bratton, who's someone who I just love his writing, and saw that he was involved, I was like, oh, this is different. I like this.
Yeah, it is different. Yeah. And then the field track is field work is at the heart of that track. Okay. So and also dealing with issues on a global scale and really looking at what's happening, the interconnectivity between the global North and global South.
Right.
And the impact and what it means to design across cultures of all kinds, disciplinary cultures, national cultures, religious cultures. And so that track starts with people. And there's an amazing anthropologist named Elizabeth Chin who is on our faculty who's a part of that. And so, but now what we're doing is we're merging the 2 tracks into one track.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, into one department. We had them separate for a while because we thought it's really important for us to go deep on these very different ways of working. Like what's happening with speculative critical design? Like how far can we push it and critique it and build it into these interesting practices? And what's happening with social innovation, which frankly we're a bit critical of. And, is there a way for designers to work when there's a power imbalance or a privilege imbalance? And, how do, what is, the field track really investigating that and giving each its own space and like a lot of time to develop a unique design approach. Right. And so now what we're doing is we're putting them back together and we're going to say, okay, so what we're going to do is have this combination of multiple kind of critical worldviews, multiple worldviews, various ways of being in the world from different cultures, wider range of cultures, and combined with approaches to emerging technologies and emerging sort of forces at play in the world, and kind of how those things come together with a kind of inquiry-led design orientation to develop
Yeah.
something for going forward. I mean, it's a really complicated
Yeah. I
time,
mean,
you know,
yeah.
and design needs to step it up. I really think we need to, design cannot fall back on the way it's been practiced in the last 50 years.
Right.
And it's really, I mean, this is like a kind of mission-driven thing. Like, I just think that we have to really step it up and be critical about what design has contributed to creating dangerous conditions, as well as, and have a lot more humility, a lot less hubris, a lot less problem solving, a lot less we're here to do it for you, and a lot more like listening and engagement and humility and invention and participation. So there we go. That's my diatribe.
I mean, I'm trying my hardest not to just gush right now, because that's just, I mean, everything you just said is all the stuff that I'm interested in. It's all the stuff that I've been thinking about over the last couple of months. It's things that come up in these conversations all the time, and that it's kind of been distilled down into this program, I think is so great and so interesting. What kind of...
Thank you for saying that.
Oh, I am a huge fan of,
awesome.
of what you're doing. I have two questions. I'm interested, like, who, let me think how to phrase these. I have two questions that are kind of related to each other. Who are the types of people that come into the program? Do they have design backgrounds already? And then kind of part B is what do students go on to do after they graduate? Kind of usually, or what's kind of the standard trajectory?
Totally. Yeah. So, again, by design, the students come from like a really broad spectrum of backgrounds.
Okay.
So Russian literature, computer science, visual anthropology, but also architecture, a lot of landscape architecture, a lot of graphic design, interaction design, film, and the idea is that they're all learning from one another, right? But and a lot of them are these kind of hybrid people, right? Like, well, I got my degree in this, but then I also always did this other thing, and then I have this third thing, and it's like, well, let's put this all together into a new design practice.
Yeah.
And and then we have a 3-year track to support people who need that design fast track kind of. And then we have a two-year path for, people who already have the design chops. And so it's a super interesting mix. And, of course, also for the faculty, we're always learning from the students as well. So, so that's really important. And then what they go on to do always, I have to say, really blows me away. Our aim, there's this piece I wrote about graduate design education, preparing designers for jobs that don't exist yet.
Yeah.
And so, so I probably wrote that. I wrote that in 2007. So I wrote that 10 years ago. At the time, the idea was, and it just was published again in that Google Span reader. But the idea was, with our program was that, we're the kind of R&D for industry. Like, we're anticipating what has yet to really fully be realized in the workplace. And we're graduating. Our goal at the time was to graduate students who would go out and walk in the door and share their work. And the, manager, supervisor would say, oh my God, we need this. We didn't know we needed it before. Now we can't not have it. And we're going to start a new job description and line of, a new line. And it's just for you. And you are going to be named X. And, whatever it is. And we have had so many, and it continues to happen. And I'm really proud of that because, that's a great aspiration. But we actually have we have loads of students we have a student who graduated from the field track and went to LinkedIn to open a new division called field research. We have people who become, I don't know, we have somebody who's an intern at a place teaching everyone how to do, how to design for augmented reality.
Oh, wow.
So our graduates have these ways of working that are sort of anticipatory that have yet to really fully land in a lot of design studios or corporations. And so we require our students to do an internship, but not in a design studio.
Oh,
They
that's
have to do
great.
an internship in a place where design is not typically found. And so that
That's
means
so
they go
interesting.
work in like a research lab at Caltech or, on the Mars rover team at the Jet Propulsion Lab or, I don't know, at the mayor's office or, some of these places designers are now increasingly being found, but our graduates were definitely some of the first people in these positions. We have a graduate who started a UNICEF innovation lab in Jakarta.
Oh, wow.
They really do these amazing things. And then, there's any student from our program who wants it could turn around tomorrow and get a job at any tech company, right? Because they're familiar with they know how to design for emerging technologies, and that's super desirable.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh, well, the plan B is you'll get this, sort of an extraordinary job.
Right. Right. That's
But then
amazing.
also, we really try to foster independent practices like the one that you're running,
Yeah.
So we have, a lot of entrepreneurs, people join startups, people go into nonprofits, activism, journalism, lots of different places. So
I love
yeah.
that. I mean, it's so great. I wanna come back to something that you said a little bit earlier when you were talking about the program. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot and starting to talk to people about. I'm very interested in specifically graphic design, but design in general's its role in culture and how culture is made. And this podcast kind of at a high level is about design criticism and how we talk about design. And I'm increasingly finding that's the piece that I feel like is missing a lot of times is design's role in a lot of these things. And that's why I was kind of smiling when you were talking about how designers really need to step it up. And the example that I always use, and it's an easy example, and I've said it many times on this podcast, but it's relevant and I think works, is the idea of fake news and how that very much is a design problem in a lot of ways, or is a product of design in a lot of ways. And so I would love to just kind of hear, I don't have a specific question there, but I would love to just kind of hear your thoughts on both design's role in kind of shaping the world, but then also the designer's role in that.
Oh boy.
I know that's a big question, and it's not really even a question, but
okay, so let's see.
After that, I just have a series of quick, easy questions to wrap it up. So,
well, okay, so what I can say is that I'm currently doing a PhD at Carnegie Mellon in the School of Design there. And for so this kind of research trajectory that I'm on has to do with my work with writing and design has found its most sort of comfortable home in this area called the digital humanities.
mm-hmm.
And so my work with writers and texts has been interested in the role of design in the structuring of writing and what that makes possible to say in and
Yeah.
through writing.
Yeah.
And really profoundly informed by Jay Bolter's book called Writing Spaces from the 80s.
I
But
don't know that one.
it's worth checking out.
Okay.
Um, and so I've kind of been a design ambassador in with humanities scholars
Right.
to say, okay, there's no neutral form of writing,
Yeah.
and the shape and structure of writing informs, what can be said, how, and by whom.
Yeah.
And that's a design question. And
Right. Yeah.
but it doesn't sit in isolation. There's no design question that sits by itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's always kind of exists at the intersection of multiple systems, and is a kind of negotiating between all of those systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think designers have a lot of tacit knowledge and understanding of the effects of their activities, the kind of ripple effect of choices that they make within a variety of systems, whether they're economic, political, social, material, all of that. So I'm just going in circles.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, that's again, these are the types of things that I've been thinking about a lot. And actually, I think kind of connecting that to writing specifically is not a connection that I had necessarily made before, but actually leads kind of perfectly into what my next question was for you, which was I was kind of interested in how being a designer has kind of influenced your writing practice or vice versa. How have those two kind of distinct creative activities shaped the other one?
I can't do either in isolation.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah.
Every time it's become really hard for me to write something without being able to see where it lives.
Oh, interesting.
And so I'm always writing in a visible context.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of what's around the writing and all of that. And so, Johanna Drecker's work she's a pretty close friend of mine and colleague. Her work on visual epistemology is super informative in thinking about and diagrammatic writing and spatializing writing. But I never see writing as I can't see writing without seeing what it's in and around and what's around it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So it's become really hard for me. I can't just open up Microsoft Word and write something of, X number of words because it's going in Journal X or something. I have to visualize a page of Journal X and think about how the argument lays out on the page and what's beside it. And, so a lot of that is it's kind of a visual kind of writing or a spatial kind of writing or a kind of diagrammatic kind of writing. And so for me, designing and writing are the same gesture.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I always think of, I talked to Michael Rock, and he had this great quote that I think about all the time, that he says that design is an elaborate form of writing, and that they're the same kind of activity, in that you're kind of taking these pre-existing pieces, whether it's images or letters, and putting them together into this kind of new thing.
Yeah. Well, the word composition, I think it's really composing, and composition is really great because, I'm
curious, and we started talking about this a little bit, but I always ask the guests, what are the kind of issues or topics that you think designers should be talking about today, or should be a part of the design discourse, or are not being talked about and should be talked about?
Let's see. I have to say that I think a lot of design discourse and criticism is pretty lightweight stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I've kind of retreated from more mainstream design environments or not retreated from, I've kind of moved towards something else, I guess, would be more the thing. And so, for me, it's just gotten deeper and deeper into academia.
Right.
But not academia. I should say it's gotten deeper and deeper into a research orientation.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings a certain kind of rigor with it.
Right.
And I'm really trying to design with the same degree of rigor that I'm also being asked to form theoretical arguments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that means I have an audience of 5.
Right.
But that's okay. I don't really care because I can't not do this work. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I love that. It's you can add one more person. It's six. It's 6 people. I mean, because that's what I feel like. I'm always afraid that I'm kind of getting a little too preachy when I talk to people, because that's where this podcast came from in a lot of ways, was this sense that the design discourse has basically become this kind of surface level critique of complaining about kerning, or looking at when, a Fortune 500 company redesigns their logo, let's, tweet about it or whatever. Right. And just felt like there was so much more that we could be talking about that wasn't being talked about.
Yeah. Well, so the other day there was a tweet that said from, a really awesome group of people, thoughtful, smart, super well educated. But it said, what designers, name some designers who have made a difference to humanity. And I was, this was like 2 days ago when the president's being really scary.
Right.
And I just tweeted, tweeted a snarky tweet, I have to admit, that just said, those who have risked their lives to fight violence and racism. And, I don't think, the idea of a designer, when you say roles and things about designers, I think that there's an inherent assumption within that question that the designer as an individual, could possibly, has these sort of authorial or heroic qualities that I actually don't think that designers have. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting theory, especially from science and technology studies, that looks at, how people are actors in networks, and I think that the human-centered, I think if designers are going to take anything on, it should be to dismantle the notion of human-centered anything, because human-centeredness is what got us in this climate change problem.
Right.
And that humans are but one aspect of a variety of, actors and agents and forces and species that live on this planet together. Right. And so I think that there are a lot of conceptual models built into notions of good design that need to be seriously dismantled.
Yes.
Users and humans and individuals and authors and heroes are all in the mix.
Yeah. I'm so mad that you bring all of this up right at the end of this conversation, because I could talk about this for another hour.
Yeah, that to me is the project. That those underlying assumptions could help to reorient the field to deal with what's happening now.
Yeah. That's so. Yeah, my last question is
You've really opened up a permission for me to just go off.
Right. Why'd you have to wait until the end of this? I agree. Like I really do agree with that 100%. And I think it got me thinking about even that term that I used of the role of the designer. And I think for me that question comes out of this sense that I feel like designers don't even think about how they fit into the larger system a lot of times. And how the work that they make is not just this kind of superficial decoration, but is contributing to these systems that already exist. And that needs to be talked about. And I feel like it's not happening in the forums where it should. In a lot of ways.
It's amazing to me that, to hear you say that, just reflecting on, like these parallel paths that we have and the fact that I'm probably 30 years older than you, is like, those are the questions I had when I was in grad school.
Yeah.
And they still persist. Like, those are the issues I had with design as a profession, as a, professional body. And the fact that we haven't gotten a whole lot further on that stuff is troubling.
Right. That actually is it's not nice, but it's a good way for me to frame this last question, which is kind of how I end all of them. And I think is interesting in this context of this kind of parallel tracks that we're on. I'm very curious, who are the books, the writers, the authors, the designers who have really influenced the way you think about this stuff or have shaped you, or what would be, a quick reading list that you would give to your students or to listeners or me to kind of think about these things in different ways, maybe.
Okay. So definitely Johanna Drucker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Catherine Hales.
Okay. I don't know her.
Catherine Hales is a literary scholar. A media critic. She wrote the book Writing Machines that I designed.
Oh yeah, I know the cover of that book.
So she's you had to buy yourself a copy.
Yeah, I'll do that. It's on my list.
Teasing you. She has a book called How We Became Posthuman.
Oh, I don't know that one.
And let's see, Donna Haraway.
Mm-hmm.
Shannon Mattern.
Okay.
These are my heroes. Matthew Kirschenbaum.
I don't know him.
He's a media archaeologist.
Okay.
Laurie Emerson.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm blanking. There's one more I know that I want. Oh, Lucy Switchman.
Oh, I don't know that name either.
And she's a science and technology studies person, and she is really good at taking apart human-centeredness and technology development.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's a great list that I need to dig into a little bit more. Some of those names were familiar, Johanna Drucker, obviously very familiar. Others I didn't. I know their names, and then some I didn't know at all. So that was a great list. And thank you so much for this conversation. This was so fun and so interesting to me. And like I said at the beginning, I love your work. I kind of love what you're doing, and the way that you think about these things. And I thought this was such a really interesting and enlightening conversation for me. So thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you. It was fun for me too.
This episode was recorded on August 18th, 2017. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.